Yeah, that's when Winston Peters' office says a contract for the new Cook Strait ferries will be signed. The government's canvassing several options for the ships, which will be shortlisted by the end of the month. Jessica Roden looks at which shipyards could be in the running.
Ships like these, made in Finland, could potentially be a solution to Inter-Islanders' ageing ferry fleet.
They have very strong track record of delivering different kinds of vessels for very demanding sea conditions around the world.
The ambassador in New Zealand this week and meeting with Winston Peters, keen to put his country's best foot forward.
We informed Finnish shipyards of this possibility, and we got a very interested many signs of interest from them.
Peters also met with Hyundai in South Korea recently, optimistic a new deal could be possible.
We know that they are seriously interested.
But we'd still have to pay a large break fee for the previous mega ferries contract. Last year, the government set up a ministerial advisory group which did a market assessment. One News understands one frontrunner was these E-Flexer ships by Swedish company Stena Roro. Built in China, it's essentially a standard design that can be customised. Another option looked at, Vincentini out of Italy.
My concern is if they go to only 2 smaller ships, they'll actually be reducing our capacity on the Cook Strait at the time when we probably need to be increasing it.
From our perspective, the progress has really been too slow. There's still a lot of uncertainty. That said, we do agree that they needed to put a halt to the IREX project.
So when will a deal be signed? This is what the Prime Minister said last year.
If we make the decision on procurement, final decision in March, we've got plenty of time and a window to make that decision.
And here's Minister Peters this week.
You're promised the framework for the future deal by the end of March. Yes, you'll get the information that you need.
In a statement, Minister Peters' office said by the end of this month, there'll be a short list of the shipyards and they'll be able to give more detail about the ship's specifications. From there, they'll need to enter a process where they assess the options and finally pick a shipyard. In terms of time frame, though, they couldn't say when this would happen, just that it would be sometime this year. The real hold-up is that Cabinet needs to decide what type of ferries to buy, rail enabled or not. And it's a can that can only be kicked down the road for so long. Jessica Roden, One News.
The situation's being labelled an omni-shambles by the government's opponents, with a lot of details about our future ferries still not known. What we do know, though, is there'll be a new Crown company leading the process and a new minister. Here's senior political reporter Benedict Collins.
Inter-Islander ferry passengers today rating their recent journeys.
I think it's pretty good, yeah. I mean, yeah, they get a bad rap.
Wasn't enough seats, they had overbooked us, and the food wasn't very great.
It's not too bad. Some days are better than others.
They're fine. You know what you're getting. It's like staying in a room above a pub.
Today was supposed to be the government's big ferry reveal.
Good afternoon.
But that's not what we got.
We are announcing that the government is establishing a new company within a value for money envelope to procure 2 new ferries.
How much money are we talking about?
Well, I'm not going to disclose that figure.
So, no new ferries and no price tag, but victory declared nonetheless.
I've delivered. I've discharged my duty to the New Zealand people.
Nicola Willis still doesn't have any new ferries, still can't say how much it's going to cost, still can't say who's ultimately going to pay for it all. I think today's a hugely embarrassing day for Nicola Willis.
It's an omni-shambles. Nicola Willis should resign over her catastrophic decision to cancel the ferries from Hyundai.
Acts pleased, expressions of interest from the private sector will be welcomed in the new process.
I just make the observation there's one company that manages to run a pretty reliable ferry service with no public money. That shows it's possible. I make that point to people frequently.
Instead of new ferries, we did get a new minister. You might recognise him.
I'm joined by the new Minister for Rail, Winston Peters. Let me start by congratulating Mr Peters on his appointment.
Mr Peters back in the move to keep their costs secret, saying it would be unwise not to.
Or worse still, act in the most uncommercial way where the market is being set by your stupidity.
Mr Peters also dismissing David Seymour's claim the ferries project would cost about half of IREX.
That's not helpful because it's not accurate.
A lot still unclear as the government inches towards new ferries.
All right, let's go live to Parliament. Benedict, not quite the announcement people had been anticipating today.
Well, it certainly wasn't, and the criticism has been coming in thick and fast, from embarrassing to incoherent to is that it? And look, it has taken the government a year now just to set up a company to go out and start looking for ferries. But what I can tell you is that what we heard today from the government about these new 200-metre ferries that they're looking at is really only Plan A. And now that Winston Peters has taken over as the Minister for Rail of this project, he actually has a bit of free rein here, and he can go out and start looking at whether there are better options. The government's open to him going out there and having a look to see if there are better options, maybe different types of ferries, maybe different areas where they could dock. Of course, he will need to convince Cabinet that it is a good idea and a better idea than Nicola Willis's. I can also tell you that the reason that it's taken so long for the government to get to this point is they've been running into real resistance with the ACT Party around the Cabinet table. Real resistance from David Seymour, and as we saw in my story there, the ACT Party, they believe that there are private operators who could do this job perfectly well, that we don't need to pour in, a few $1 billion of public money into these ferries. Of course, not everyone around that Cabinet table agrees.
Kia ora, Benedict. Thank you for that. The much-awaited plans for the new Cook Strait ferries finally unveiled today, but it'll be a much longer wait until we see them actually set sail, and a lot of details been left floating. As announced last year, the IREX project's so-called Ferrari ferries planned by the last government at a cost of $551 million sunk, and confirmed today, replaced by two smaller ones. But the government won't say how much the new ferry plan will cost, and it revealed it'll still consider alternative proposals from the private sector. A new Crown-owned company will be set up to take charge of buying the new ferries, expected to start operating in 2029. In charge of the project, Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, who's been given a new role, Minister for Rail. Our coverage begins with One News reporter Jessica Roden in Picton with reaction.
1 year ago exactly, Cabinet axed the mega ferries project with no plan B in place. And big news today, there's still no firm plan.
But what I can do today is look at all of you and commit that no matter what, we will be procuring two ferries that will ensure a safe and reliable ferry service. We will be doing that for less than the cost of Project IREX.
Inter-Islander has 3 ferries now, all approaching 30 years old. The government saying, trust us, there will be new ships before they retire.
We still have more to learn, there's no doubt about that, but I think we're starting to understand the pathway forward.
Sorry.
Watching today's development closely was Kitty Fitton.
You couldn't make it up, could you?
She and her 5 children were on board the Kaitaki last year when it lost power.
I am pretty horrified because I have no idea how the infrastructure is already creaking at the seams. We already know that it's not working.
The old plan would have seen the first mega ferry arrive in 2026. The new plan is for replacements to be operating by 2029.
Right now we've got another 15 trucks crossing over tonight that we want to make sure that we've got a reliable crossing. So we want some immediate solutions to the reliability of the Cook Strait. 5 years away for something to happen is still a very long time.
Experts have recommended the ships shouldn't be rail enabled, which means freight would be transferred on. But ministers are keeping the door open about that. They've also had advice the new ferries should be 200 metres in length, only slightly longer than what we already have. That means less additional portside infrastructure is required, but upgrades still essential. The wharf behind me was due to be demolished under IREX, and while it's had its life extended, it needs to be replaced in the next 5 years. The issue is that until we know which ferries will be using facilities like this, upgrades can't begin. And the ports have been told they'll have to foot more of the bill.
We need to look at the business case and we need to understand the proposition that's being put to us, what we're going to have to design and provide, and how that's going to be paid for.
For those answers, the minister's saying, bear with us, we'll get back to you in March. Until then,
we've got absolutely no choice but to use this dilapidated, outdated equipment that, quite frankly, almost killed us.
Jessica Roden, One News.
Newly released documents show the government put aside $300 million to cover the break fees for all the abandoned mega ferry project. Just the latest revelation in the long-running saga. In 2018, the plans put forward for 2 large rail-enabled ferries with an estimated cost of $775 million. Costs keep rising. By June 2021, up to $1.4 billion, mainly on planned infrastructure, not the actual ships. Later that month, KiwiRail signs a fixed-price contract with South Korean company Hyundai Mipo for 2 mega ferries at a price of $551 million. But by February 2023, the project costs escalate significantly to $2.6 billion. In November, the incoming government's advised of a further increase to $3 billion. The government ditches the IREX project a month later. In the new year, a ministerial advisory group's established to provide advice on the ferries. 4 months later, it reports back to the government recommending 2 medium-sized roll-on, roll-off ferries. Its findings weren't released publicly. And in December, it's back to the drawing board. Winston Peters is named Minister for Rail, with a new company to be set up to deliver the ferries. Here's Jessica Roden with the latest.
When the mega ferries were axed, the plan ahead sounded simple.
The Ferrari is not the only car in the garage. Let's look and see if we can get some better value options. The Toyota Corolla option, the reliable option.
Cabinet brought in experts, and today their advice was finally released. The Ministerial Advisory Group initially suggested last February that KiwiRail try to renegotiate the contract with Hyundai to get them to build smaller ships that weren't rail-enabled. The Finance Minister says that didn't work out.
When we then tried to pursue that, the option that came back was very expensive.
$300 million has been put aside to deal with the repercussions of breaking that contract.
The break fee is not just for the ferries, it's for the infrastructure that's being built around it as well. So it's much less than you say.
But Minister Peters did meet with Hyundai in South Korea last week and seems optimistic a new deal could be on the cards.
We had a very frank discussion. We know that they are seriously interested.
It's another humiliation for Nicola Willis. She shouldn't have rushed in, cancelled the new inter-island ferry contract before figuring out what the government was going to do instead.
The advisory group also said second-hand ships are not an option. It recommended a contract for new ferries be signed by last October at the latest. A new company should be set up and eventually run the inter-islander service rather than KiwiRail. And the only way the Crown can reduce the safety and reliability issues currently is by replacing the ferries ASAP. Ministers received the last of these independent reports in June, and while they have been publicly released today, large sections have been redacted. For example, the companies other than Hyundai, which have been contacted about building the new ships, have been withheld. One thing is clear, the advisors recommended roll-on, roll-off ferries. Rail freight can be lifted onto them, but trains can't drive on.
That's almost a red herring. We think the bigger issue is the risk of reducing the number of vessels from Inter-Islander's current 3 vessels down to 2.
Minister Peters, though, is a long-time advocate for rail-enabled ferries.
I told you we're looking at every option, not just what I inherited.
He says hold fire, he'll have more to say soon.
We were promised the framework for the future deal by the end of March. Yes, you'll get the information that you need.
What the country really needs, some new ferries, and it's still not clear when that'll happen. Jessica Roden, One News.
Good afternoon. This is a press conference about the KiwiRail new ferries and infrastructure. There will be questions after it, and it's a press conference on this issue and this issue alone. That's how important the matter is. The IREX program, which our government cancelled in December 2023, should be studied by members of the public who want to see their dollars respected. It is a cautionary tale. In 2020, when we were responsible for KiwiRail, we committed $400 $400.1 million as a taxpayer contribution to buying 2 new ferries and readying the infrastructure for them. Back then, the total cost of that program was supposed to be $1.4 billion, with most costs financed by KiwiRail and the ports. Today, we're announcing that we're saving the taxpayers billions. That arrangement back then placed the commercial incentive on the companies to keep the costs low. What happened between 2021, when the ship contract was signed, and 2023, when the truth came out about this project, is as follows. The project leaders approached this task as though they were pricing the job, not delivering it. They did so because the previous government gave them every reason to believe they would get their way. The only method to stop behaviour like that is to do exactly as the Minister of Finance did in December 2023. Today we have vindicated the decision of the Minister of Finance to stop the old project. Both ferries will have 2.4 kilometres of lanes for trucks and cars, with space for 40 rail wagons. We serve both because they serve every business pitch across our provinces and our cities in New Zealand. The reason for this is just plain common sense. Road-only ferries would require us to reconfigure the whole operation at considerable costs. Road and rail ferries mean we shunt large freight volumes in single movements. That saves time, and time saves money. In the meantime, it should be patently obvious to even the most casual observer that an infrastructure program that makes use of what is already there will be markedly cheaper than the IREX program, which sought to knock everything down and build utopia in its place. We are saving the taxpayer billions. Port Marlborough, Centreport and Kirriwell have approached this with a focus on pragmatism, cost effectiveness and a heavy dose of reality. Together with Ferry Holdings, they have a single plan to concentrate on now and to deliver on. And we'll back them all the way.
And in his capacity as Rail Minister, Winston Peters has released the desired specifications for the 2 new Cook Strait ferries, promising they'll be rail-enabled and on the water in 4 years. The government will now shop around for a builder, promising this deal will save taxpayers billions compared to the cancelled IREX ferry project. Here's senior political reporter Benedict Collins.
These were to be our new Cook Strait ferries, due to start sailing here next year. But a blowout in portside costs saw this government torpedo them. Now a new promise, 2 new ferries by Christmas 2029.
They will get you, your family, the caravan, the dog, and all the rest across the strait, which is what New Zealanders want to happen.
The new ferries will be about 200 metres long, a bit bigger than the current Aratiri, a bit smaller than the proposed IREX ferries.
Both ferries will have capacity for 1,500 passengers. Trucks will drive onto these ferries. Rail will shunt onto these ferries.
The announcement's been broadly welcomed by the freight industry, and the Maritime Union reckons it's fabulous news.
Well, it just ticks all the boxes. It's a key piece of infrastructure between the north and the south. And they just could bring them on and then take them off at the other end. No double handling on either side.
Mr Peters says the smaller ferries means money can be saved on infrastructure costs in Wellington and Picton.
While some may regret the absence of a Taj Mahal in Picton and a Sydney Opera House in Wellington, the people paying their taxes will not.
Now the government will ask shipbuilders to bid for the contract, and it's making grand promises.
We are saving the taxpayer billions.
I think it's very unlikely, almost impossible, that this will all end up being cheaper.
But the costs are being kept under wraps for now.
It's very difficult if you're negotiating port infrastructure and or ferries that you actually don't want to reveal what our envelopes are and what our framing is around the budget.
You ever been to the paid cards? Well, if you show the other side of your cards, you haven't got a chance of winning, have you?
All New Zealanders know at this point is that they're going to end up with a smaller version of what they were previously going to get, and it's going to take longer. And in the meantime, the current ferries will limp along.
Another leg in the long-winded ferry replacement project now underway. Benedict Collins, One News.